disruptive.
America that I fought for.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Been a fantastic day so far. So, this is a dark, interesting report that just came out from the Canadian Armed Forces that detailed how beneficial the pandemic was for the establishment as a whole. Because this came out, this is from the Ottawa Citizen, reported this, saying military leaders saw a pandemic as unique opportunity to test propaganda techniques on Canadians, a forces report says. A plan devised by Canadian Joint Operations Command relied on propaganda techniques similar to those employed during the Afghanistan war. It was all just fun and games for them. But for the rest of us, it was, sit down, shut up, do as we say, and try to ride it out. If you lose your business, if you, miss years of school and fallen back on your education, well, it sucks to be you. We just don't really have the science to back any of this. And you're not allowed to question that science or research your own because research is reading, and God knows we can't allow readers in this society. It says Canadian military leaders saw the pandemic as a unique opportunity to test out propaganda techniques on an unsuspecting public. A newly released Canadian Forces report concludes. The federal government never asked for the so-called information operations campaign, nor did Cabinet authorize the initiative developed during COVID-19 pandemic by the Canadian Joint Operations Command. They headed by Lieutenant General Mike Ralu, I think that's how you say Ralu. But military commanders believed they didn't need to get approval from high authorities to develop and proceed with their plan. We don't need those people. We just went for it. Again, it's all fun and games for us. According to this, retired Major Colonel Daniel Grosslin, who was brought in to investigate the scheme, concluded in this report. The propaganda plan was developed and put place in April 2020, even though the Canadian Forces had already acknowledged that the information operations and targeting policies and doctrines are aimed at adversaries have been limited application in a domestic concept. A copy of the December 2nd, 2020 Gosselin investigation, as well as other related documents, was obtained by this newspaper using the Access to Information Law. The plan devised by the Canadian Joint Operations Command, also known as the CJOC, relied on propaganda techniques similar to those employed during the Afghanistan war. The campaign called for shaping and exploiting information. So now I kind of see the picture. And if anyone goes out there and reads or counteracts or provides context to information so we can provide a better perspective for people so that they can come to their own conclusions, you're considered a threat. You're considered a terrorist. You're considered the side of the others. And we can't have readers in this world. We can't have people that are contradicting the great experts that are manipulating us, that are exploiting the information towards us. The CJOC claimed that the information operations scheme was indeed to head off civil disobedience by Canadians during the coronavirus pandemic and to bolster government messages about the pandemic. A separate initiative not linked to the CJOC plan, but overseen by Canadian Forces intelligence officers, called information from public social media accounts in Ontario. Data was also complied on peaceful Black Lives Matter gatherings and BML leaders. Senior military officers claimed that information was needed to ensure the success of Operation Lasser, the Canadian Forces' mission to help out in long-term care homes hit by COVID-19 and to aid in the distribution of vaccines in some northern communities. BML organizers have questioned why military officials gathered information on their initiative, pointing out they have followed the pandemic rules and did not hold any gatherings outside LTC homes. But I find that interesting because when it came to George Floyd, when it came to that, when people came together for that, it seemed like the pandemic just went on pause for a bit. It went on a vacation. That we were allowed to gather if it's okay for Black Lives Matter, but you're not allowed to gather for a birthday party. You're not allowed to go outside and interact with people. You weren't even allowed to go to parks and get fresh air and exercise and sunlight. You know, things that our doctors have been saying for years. Since the existence of humanity, you know, vitamin D is important, but we were allowed to get it. It's all interesting. Then Chief of Defense Staff General John Vance shut down the CJOC propaganda initiative after a number of his advisors questioned the legality and ethics behind the plan. Vance then brought in Gosselin to examine how CJOC was able to develop and launch the propaganda operation without approval. Gosselin's investigation discovered the plan wasn't simply the idea of the passionate military propaganda, the passionate. Wow, that's funny. But support of those use of such information operations was clearly a mindset that premented the thinking at many levels of the CJOC. Those in command saw the pandemic as a unique opportunity to test out such techniques on Canadians. Views put forth by is that Admiral? Rear Administrative Brian Santamprin, yeah. When CJOC's chief of staff summed up the command's attitude, Gosselin noted in this report, This is really a long opportunity for all of us and a chance to start getting information operations to our routine." The Rear Admiral state. Okay, so it is Admiral. I wasn't sure what the ADM stood for. The command said the military's pandemic response as an opportunity to monitor and collect public information in order to enhance awareness for better command decisions making. Gosselin also pointed out how the CJOC staff had a palpable dismissive attitude toward the advice and concerns raised by other military leaders. So, again, those who were questioning the motives behind, you know, the mandates, the lockdowns, the authoritarian measures, the fact that we're, you know, beating the shit out of peaceful Canadians during the Freedom Convoy and not prosecuting those who have manipulated, lied to us. You weren't allowed to, not even when you're in the offices of such these heinous acts. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. And of course, they used this opportunity to enact these measures, to enact these laws. And this is already kind of foreshadowed way beforehand because we've shown this before. But Theresa Tam, the health minister of Canada, back in 2010, kind of foreshadowed the idea that wouldn't it be interesting if we had a scenario where we could roll out these measures and test Canadians on how accepted they are to compliance, and if they're not compliant, we can actually arrest them. Well, listen to this.
I think the public has to know this is one of the worst case scenarios in terms of an infectious disease outbreak, in that their cooperation is sought. If there are people who are non-compliant, there are definitely laws and public health powers that can quarantine people in mandatory settings. It's potential you could track people, put bracelets on their arms, have police and other setups to ensure quarantine is undertaken. It is better to be preemptive and precautionary and take the heat of people thinking you might be overreactionary, get ahead of the curve, and then think about whether you've overreacted later. But it's such a serious situation that I think decisive early action is the key.
And that's from the words of a caring individual who cares really about your health. That's why she's in dark lighting. That's why they have dramatic music underneath her little rant here about, well, it wouldn't be interesting if potentially we could track and monitor people. If they aren't complying, we could just arrest them and send them to jail and then convict them of crimes of not behaving in coordinates of our made up laws. That's someone that really cares about you, right? And they use that really harsh lighting, and you could see her like gritting her teeth, like, oh, I can't wait for this day. I can't wait for something to happen so I could roll out these heinous measures against Canadians. I could really have the powerful impact of being a dictator and demonize majority of Canadians as being uncompliant, and then when they rise against me, I could say that they're misogynist and racist, and they're also convicted of other crimes, and we could just demonize half the population that aren't compliant with the status quo that I have cultivated. Let's finish the rest of this.
Police checkpoints are set up on all the bridges, and everyone leaving the city is required to show proof of vaccination. Those who refuse to cooperate are taken away to temporary detention centers.
This is back in 2010, ladies and gentlemen. That was from a documentary in 2010. Testing scenarios of, wouldn't it be interesting if there was this global pandemic, if some sort of viral outbreak occurred and we just kind of, took measures into our own hands, unscientific, unqualified measures that aren't backed by true facts, that aren't backed by medical researchers and advancements that would actually benefit society as a whole, and how we could demonize doctors and nurses that were actually reliant on helping people and not just doing measures for the advancement of big pharmaceuticals. That is just amazing to me that happened in 2010. And still to this day, Theresa Tam still goes on, CTV and City News and Global News and all these different networks, and still advancing big pharmaceutical propaganda by saying, hey, you gotta get up to your 11th shot now because it's so safe and effective. Just think of all the excess deaths that are occurring. Oops, did I say that loud? They're very safe and effective. Ignore that fact. Ignore the myocarditis. It's just a little enhancement. It's a little flavoring. And I said this when Fauci was having his testimony, and we did videos on him, excessively lying during his testimony because he's a pathological liar. I said that, at this point, we should also be having prosecution and testimonial by Theresa Tam, because she also enacted the same measures that Anthony Fauci did in response to not actually complying with understanding of the virus. They didn't actually have any scientific data to prove these claims. They just went forward and lied to you and manipulated you and fearmongered you that if you didn't become compliant of these authoritarian measures, like taking your public data when you're about to, head to the bridges, and that's why the truckers said enough was enough, that we have to take your personal data, we have to track and monitor you, make sure you're going in the direction that we say we want you to go. Otherwise, we might arrest you. We might hold you back. We might disapprove you. And now those same measures that were used for COVID is going further and further along into, digital IDs and so on and so forth, which is something that they've wanted to do for a long while. And COVID was just the opportunity to do so. So it's devastating nonetheless. It's devastating nonetheless, and I am not going to be silent in, not calling this out, because not only is it the greatest global-wide schemes and scandals that our society has faced in years, but we're also still dealing with, even though we're kind of done with COVID and kind of moved on from it, we're still dealing with the grips of a totalitarian state that's moving forward with their agenda and their policies to enact mass surveillance and restrictions and cover-ups and censorship that evolved during the pandemic. So that's why I'm still speaking up about this. Even though I know so many people that are screaming at me saying, oh, it's in the past, move on. Move on. Why do you have to bring this up? Why do you have to keep talking about it? Like, let's just move on. Let's think of happy thoughts. Because they don't want to be confronted with this. They don't want to know that they've been lied to and they acted like fools. And I'm willing to apologize to those people. I'm willing to, forgive the people that screamed at me or screamed at others for saying, why aren't you more compliant? Why aren't you getting your 19th shot or whatever? But we have to come together to realize this. And the whole point of all this is to provide all this context that people are aware of all this and you have a better understanding of the pandemic, of the virus, and you have a better consciousness so that you can make a better decision based on yourself. That's what all this comes down to. I'm not advancing any agenda. I'm not pushing any, person in a direction. I'm just saying this is what happened, and you make the decision based on your health, based on your behalf. Because it really comes down to the patient. It really comes down to you having your individual freedom, having your bodily autonomy, decide what's best for you. And the fact they kept a lot of this information under wraps in the dark and discouraged people from spreading this information made me realize that this was way bigger than just protecting people and for science. That those are fabricated lies in order to hide you away from the truth.